Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Guy at McDonald's, submitted by Jeff E. During my sophomore year of college, I'd been working at a local grocery store in the town that I was attending school. I was living on campus about an hour away from my house and just wanted something to supplement partying and having fun and not draining the money that I had made over the summer. Unfortunately, the supermarket had to let a bunch of people go, and even though I worked for the same chain in my hometown, there was nothing that they could do to keep on a couple of us part-timers. Looking back, I laugh at that and wonder why they would get rid of part-time help and not just one full-time person. Oh well, I was a musician and not a business or finance major, so I just figured whatever, I don't understand, so what. I still wanted to make some extra cash though, beer nights, going out to bars, and so on. So I decided to take a job at the area McDonald's. There were 2 other students from the college that worked there, but most of the people who did work there were townies. For the most part, they were all really cool. Our restaurant was located on the main drag a little ways away from campus, and there were a couple of other restaurants also out there not far from ours. They interspersed stores like TJ Maxx, the supermarket I mentioned before, and so on. After about 3 weeks of working Saturday and Sunday mornings, yeah, believe me, as a college student, getting up to work Saturday and Sunday mornings was a complete pain in the ass, and I assure you I was more than hungover most every time I was there. But I liked it, because it let me out on the afternoons and also offered me the ability to work a couple of nights a week if I wanted to as well. Weekend shifts were not very popular with anyone. I didn't care. I was 20 years old, full of energy, and knew I could do it without problems, and I was never late once. As I was saying, I started to notice something strange. There was this group of people, some older folks who we found out would go up and down the street hitting up all of the restaurants for a senior coffee and other senior discount food. They would start at one end and spend the majority of their day going from restaurant to restaurant, turning around and going back the other way. Okay, whatever. It was just a bunch of older ladies, and that's what they liked to do. Sit in a restaurant with their coffee, smoke cigarettes and talk, and then maybe get a sandwich or something. The weird thing was, one of the women had this really weird son who would often accompany them. I didn't know if he was handicapped or mentally challenged, but he just kind of seemed really fucked up. He always was wearing a Led Zeppelin t-shirt, and he wore these aviator sunglasses that he never took off. For the most part, he always sat with them listening to them talk, and if I happened to be coming by, or anybody for that matter, just sweeping or cleaning up ashtrays, he would launch into these long diatribes about how Led Zeppelin was the greatest band of all time. Now, I also really like Led Zeppelin, but he, without prompting, would just start rattling off all these facts about the band. Usually, I would just go back into the kitchen, and everyone would start laughing, asking if I had just gotten the Led Zeppelin lecture. Again, he was harmless. That is, until one night, a couple of weeks later. I'd taken a fill-in job on, I think it was a Thursday night, as a coworker had called off, and I figured, what the hell, I'll do it. My manager told me if I did it, I could have Saturday morning off, and I thought, all right, looks like I'm going out Friday night and having some fun at a local bar. The guy I was talking about came in a little after the dinner rush when we were getting things back into order after lots of people had been in and out. He came up to the front, and I was in the back, but I noticed him standing there doing nothing, while my friend, I'll call Christy, was asking him if she could take his order. He just had this blank look on his face, and then he finally ordered 2 combo meals. We all heard him order, and thought maybe he was getting food for his mom or something. But he wasn't. He took the food and went back to where all the people usually sat and smoked, and he put out both of the meals on the table, like one on his side, and the other on the other side. Right then, my manager asked me to go check out the men's restroom to see if it needed any attention, which the guy was right by. I hated going to check on bathrooms, but the normal maintenance guy who did all that stuff during the day did not work at night, so the responsibilities fell on us. It's just the way it is at a fast food joint. As I left the kitchen to go back to the restrooms, I heard the guy loudly talking and giving another Led Zeppelin lecture. He was giving it to an invisible person on the other side of the table. There was no one there, but he was carrying on a conversation and answering questions that no one had asked him. I stood there for a minute, but I didn't say anything. Went and took care of the bathroom, and then went back to tell my manager what was going on. Again, I don't know if the guy was mentally disturbed, but now I was starting to think maybe he was. I mean, he wasn't doing anything wrong, so there was nothing we could really say or do. I mean, he just sat there eating his food, smoking cigarettes, and going on and on about Led Zeppelin to this invisible friend. When a female coworker needed to go check on the women's bathroom, I was a little concerned that something strange might happen, so I told my manager I would hang around outside the restrooms in the back area, as no one else was there except this guy. I could just sweep up, check the garbage cans, that sort of thing. I don't know why, I just had a weird feeling. But nothing happened. The guy eventually got up, took the food across from him that had not been eaten, threw it in the garbage, and walked out the back door. Okay, I thought, man, that was a little odd. But again, he didn't do anything wrong. He paid for his food, he cleaned up, and he left. That Sunday, I noticed he was not with the group of women on their usual Saturday and Sunday treks. Again, not my business, so I just thought it was odd. At school, we were coming up on a break, and some other friends of mine were leaving earlier than I was. I was planning to go home for break too, but I picked up a couple of more evening shifts just for some extra cash to hang out with my homies when I got back to my hometown. This was right before Thanksgiving break, and I was planning on being home on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I'm sure everybody listening to this knows that this is one of the biggest party nights of the year. That's why I picked up a Monday and Tuesday night shift. Just wanted to have some more cash in my pockets when I saw my friends. As I was working in the back, the same thing happened as before. The guy came in, ordered 2 meals, and the entire process was repeated. But this time, the heated debate about Led Zeppelin with this imaginary friend started to get out of hand. He was the only guy back in the smoking area, and my manager went back to see what was going on. This dude was so irate about something that we couldn't understand. He had picked up the food for the invisible person and started whipping it at the wall and screaming about some song or one another. Before my manager made any decision about throwing the guy out, he walked over to ask the guy if he could please calm down, and if any other customers came in, they might have an issue with him yelling. I'm assuming he was really cool about it because my manager was pretty chill. He wasn't that much older than me at the time and was really good at his job and really good at leading all of us. The guy sat back down as my manager came into the back to go to his office. But as he was coming back and walking past us, we all heard a loud smash. My manager turned around and I followed him, along with my friend Tony, to see what the hell was going on. There was the guy, with blood all over his hands. He had kicked and punched the glass on the back door. I mean, he was bloody as all hell, and when my manager saw that, he told us to get back into the back and to call 911. He was going to stay out and try to handle this guy. We ran into the back. Tony went to the office to make the phone call, and I tried to explain to everybody up in front who didn't know what was going on what was actually going on. Then I heard my manager yell, and I ran back out of the kitchen to see what the next problem was. This guy had pulled out a knife and was swinging it around wildly, and my manager was backing up. He backed up into me without even turning, and he screamed, "Get back in the kitchen!" And I did. He followed, and we locked the door, and we told all of the girls, for whatever reason all of our cashiers were girls, to get into the kitchen as well. Tony had already called the police and told them what was going on. Then we heard the guy banging on the kitchen door. I mean, mind you, he could have just gone around to the front and made his way back into the kitchen. But he just sat there banging on the door over and over and yelling all this kinds of crazy stuff about Led Zeppelin. Eventually, things quieted down and we didn't hear him anymore. My manager went around to the front cash registers and slowly poked his head around the corner to look into the back of the restaurant. The guy wasn't there. Tony went up into the front and told my manager that the police were on their way. And that's when my manager looked over to the side where the drive-through window was. There was the guy standing there, still having the knife in his hand, trying to climb in through the window. Again, the front door was open, the back door was open, and this dude was trying to climb in through a window? By this time, the girls had come up front and were screaming because they could see his bloody hands all over the windows, and of course his knife being waved around. I mean, it was a scary thing. I'm not going to lie to anybody. I was scared. Just then we heard sirens coming, and thank God there were no other customers that time of night, because I'm sure they would have all been freaked out and maybe even gotten hurt. Thank heaven for small favors, I guess. The funny thing is, the guy didn't even try to run when he obviously knew the police were on their way. He just stood there in the drive-thru as one car came up from behind him, and another car came from the exit. They had him in their headlights, and he just stood there. They did the whole drop the knife, get down on your knees routine, and obviously saw that his hands were very, very messed up. We were all kind of huddled around the drive-thru window watching as all this happened. At least my manager and I were up front, and the three girls and Tony were right behind us. We watched the whole thing go down. We heard an ambulance coming, and one of the police cars backed out of the drive-thru to let the ambulance in. And all the while, the guy just stood there, not saying anything. Then as the paramedics were going to get him on a stretcher, get him the attention that he needed for this very messed up hands, he looked directly into the drive-thru window at us with this crazy look on his face. Then he yelled, "Physical graffiti is the greatest Led Zeppelin of all time!" And that was it. They took him away. We all breathed a sigh of relief and had a lot of talking to the police about what had happened. My manager had to call the area manager to figure out how we were going to fix the door temporarily, and he made the decision to shut the restaurant down for the rest of the night. He was going to hire a cleaning crew to clean up all the blood, which I thought was pretty nice, seeing as how I didn't want to have any of us touching any of that. I mean, who knows where that guy had been or what he was all about. So we wrapped things up, and my manager and area manager stayed on after we left. The next night I came in for my shift, and the door was taped up but still operational. I talked to my manager, who told me that the police had done a number of phone calls in their investigation, and it turns out this guy was off of some meds. He wasn't a drug addict or anything, and he wasn't mentally ill. He was just on some kind of medication that he needed to prevent him from acting out. I suppose it was some kind of adult Ritalin or something. And that was a messed up night. I remember after my Tuesday shift, I was going to jump in my car and head home for Thanksgiving break, knowing that the first things my friends were going to ask was, "Hey, how's it going?" Well, I knew I would have something to share, that's for sure. I never saw that guy again. Even on the Saturdays and Sundays, I never saw that group of women either. They stopped going up and down the street. I'm sure that there was a lot of embarrassment involved in that, and I feel bad that they might have thought that way. I mean, for all I know, the police might have told them to avoid the restaurant for a while. That spring, I got a job working on campus, so I ended up quitting that job, but I would stop by more than once on their cheeseburger special night and talk to my old manager. Over the years, I lost track of all those people, and I wonder where they are, just as much as I wonder where that guy is now. Hopefully he's alive, hopefully he's still on his meds, and hopefully he's not hurt anyone in a fit that he really couldn't control. Hell Night in a Convenience Store by Shelley Y. I am a 32-year-old female, and this took place 10 years ago when I was just out of college. All through school, I worked at a convenience store/gas station, kept a job while I was trying to find work as a school teacher. It was part of a chain of stores that are now 7-Elevens, and was located in a rural part of the state. In fact, it was the only store of its kind between a larger city and the middle of nowhere, so lots of people stopped in with boats and RVs on their way to a campground about 25 miles away. At that time, we only stayed open until midnight, but my boss always made sure there were at least 2 people working every night. A lot of people would get really pissed off when we were inside cleaning up after we closed because they wanted beer or gas or whatever, and because they could still see us there, and they thought we should still be open. Sorry, not the case. Most of the time, they just peeled out of the parking lot after swearing at us or kicking the door, etc. One summer night, my coworker, I'll call him Jim, asked me for a favor. He told me he needed to leave early, but didn't want our boss to know, so could I punch him out when I did my time card? He said he had to pick up his girlfriend at the train station in the city and didn't want her waiting around that late at night. I figured, no big deal, but then he left like an hour earlier, and that kind of made me mad. I thought early meant like 15 minutes or so. It's not that I was scared to be alone there at night. It was just that it meant there was no way I was going to get everything taken care of and be able to leave right after midnight. Oh well. Around 11:30, the store got the normal rush of people coming to get snacks and drinks, as most of them were regulars and knew we closed at midnight. I managed to get most of the things I needed to get done, and was looking forward to getting home on time and having a beer or two with my roommate and some friends. So, just after midnight, I locked the doors and started to cash out the registers to put the money in a safe in the manager's office. When I came back out into the store to dim the lights, I noticed a truck had pulled up to one of the pumps. A short, balding guy got out and started to get gas, but the pumps automatically shut down at midnight, and I had no way of turning them back on. I could see him getting angry, and he dropped the pump and made his way to the store. I was now behind the counter and getting things straight there, and heard him knock on the front glass door. I didn't even look up, but I told him that we were closed. And this made him very angry, and he started shouting that if he couldn't get gas, could he at least get a pack of cigarettes. I shook my head and let him know that the registers were also closed, which was not entirely true, but I still couldn't help him. "Sorry," I said. "There's an all-night place in the city that can help you, though." He looked away, but then banged on the door and said it was just a pack of cigarettes, and could I throw them out the door to him, and he'd leave money on the ground if I was worried about a robbery. What? Who said anything about a robbery? I again told him I couldn't help him, and this is when he got really mad. "Just give me a pack of Camels. I don't have time for this shit," he said. I just gave him a shrug as if to say, "What do you want me to do?" I grabbed a broom and started sweeping up behind the register. "You're a real fucking cunt, you know that? I just want a pack of smokes." "Well, I can't help you. I'm sorry, but calling me names certainly isn't going to help you get what you want," I replied. Guy goes nuts, starts kicking and punching the door. He gets in a good kick, and the bottom piece of glass spiderwebs, and he yells out in pain. I tell him I'm calling the cops and my boss, and he proceeds to limp towards his truck, and then stops to call me some more names. He then picks up a metal garbage can and throws it at the door. I ran back to the office and called the police. And they told me to stay inside the store, and they will send someone out, but it's going to be at least 20 minutes. I stay on the line with them as I can hear the guy out front still screaming, "Get back out here, you stupid bitch! Open this fucking door!" Then I call my boss on my cell phone, but he doesn't answer, and it's likely he's out at a bar or something, so I just leave a frantic message about the guy and the cops. And then I hear the glass door breaking again, and I peek out to see the guy is pushing open the shattered glass portion of the door and trying to crawl in, getting his hands cut and bloody. I screamed, slammed the office door shut and locked it, and screamed to the police that he's getting into the store. Then it's quiet for a bit. I think maybe he gave up and was still outside, but I was wrong. There was a sudden pounding on the door, and the guy yelling, "I got my smokes, you dumb bitch! What are you gonna do now, asshole?" Then he starts laughing and keeps pounding on the door. A few minutes later, I hear what I think is him leaving, and crack the door just enough to see him get into his truck with a 6-pack of beer. He starts the truck and heads out of the lot towards the boonies and not the city. I walk out to see the office door is covered in bloody pink smears from his pounding, and there's blood on the counter and all around the door. The police show up eventually, and I tell them what happened, and then they call my boss and get a hold of him. He was asleep and says he'll be right out. When he gets there, he's pissed, but not at me, just the damage to the door. I told the police the color of the truck, it was red, and what direction it went. They see that things here are under control as my boss starts to put a piece of plywood up over the door for the time being. Then he asks me where Jim was in all of this. I don't want to lie, but I still haven't punched out and can't claim that he did either. My boss was really pissed, but not at me. He did say never promise to punch someone out again, and then asked if I was going to be okay to get home. He was going to stay until the police came back. I was alright, a little shaken up, but I get out to my little Toyota and start my way home. It's only a 15-minute ride, but about halfway there, I see lights from behind me coming up very fast. And then I see it's a red truck, and it's right on my bumper. I mean, it actually hits my car, my head bobbed forward. The truck slows down, but then comes right back and rams me again. Then it pulls alongside me and forces me off the road onto this little turnaround on the side. I think I can dart ahead, but it gets in front of me and there's nowhere to go. Guess who it is? Out jumps Crazy Guy, who limps over to my window and starts smashing his hands on the window, screaming, "I'm gonna fix you, you little bitch! It's party time!" I am beyond terrified as his hands are still bleeding and he's leaving those pink smears on the glass. I'm shrieking, and I crawl over the passenger side and pop the door open and basically fall out of the car. I got up and just started running. He's yelling at me, but he can't keep up because of his hurt foot.
Get back here, you bitch! I'm not through by a long shot!
I am now running up the highway, realizing that my phone is still in the car, and I am in the middle of fucking nowhere. I hear his truck start moving, but thank God lights appeared in front of me. It was the police coming back from their search. They see me, and this guy can't turn around in time for them to get right up on him. They haul him out of his truck and handcuff him. The entire time he was screaming at me still. It turns out he was high on PCP and didn't feel a thing in his body. One officer put the guy in the car, and the other walked me back to mine. The bumper was all mashed up, and they made arrangements for a tow truck, and another car pulled up to take me home. I gave them my statement about what had happened, and it wasn't for another 8 months or so before I had to show up in court to testify against the guy. He's now in jail somewhere, and that's good. I stayed working at that store for another few months before I got a long-term substitute position and left the area. That was definitely the most scared I've ever been. I shudder to think what he would have done to me if he had caught me. Creepy Coworker, submitted by Telly O. This took place in the early 2000s when I was in between deciding what I wanted to do with college. I had an associate's degree, but wasn't sure if I wanted to go on for my 4-year degree or get another associate's. I was working at a fast food joint, and I'm not going to give the name of it. I don't think that's necessary. I don't want to say it was unbelievably demeaning, but it was a mundane job for a person of my age, and I'm not knocking it for those where that's all they can get for work, but at that point in my life, I was a 1380 SAT guy, trying to scrape up money for more schooling. I suppose that makes me sound like I think I'm superior, and at the risk of sounding wicked arrogant, I kind of admit I was above most of the people I was working with as far as intellect. I mean, call me a jerk, it's just the truth, and you'll find out why pretty fast. I was closing the store almost every night, 6 days a week easily. I wasn't what you would call an assistant manager, I was called a shift leader. Usually our manager or assistant manager was long gone by the time I was finishing up the things that I needed to finish up. Our front doors closed at 10, but the drive-thru was open until midnight. It was the only way you could get food. We had a woman who worked in the back, and at that time of night we only really needed one person back there. There was me, a person who was mopping and wiping down all the tables in the dining room, and her, I'll call her Julie. There was also another woman who was running the drive-thru cashier, but she was kind of away from us. Julie was very strange. She would often talk to herself and often just be caught staring into space, missing out on orders. I mean, she got along with everyone, but she was just very, very weird. Although she had multiple uniforms, she would wear the same one every single day for a week at a time and then change to another one for the next week. Working in fast food, I mean, outside of the food and condiments getting on your clothes, I mean, all the smells of oils, the broiler, and then add body odor and someone who obviously did not wash all the time, makes for one gamey appearance. But she worked well with everyone, and no one gave her a hard time. One night, a person came back from the drive-thru complaining about their meal. They said it tasted funny and wanted either an exchange or a refund. And when we pressed him about what was wrong with the meal, he couldn't put his finger on it, but he said it just didn't taste right. Usually at that time of night, I was not into arguing with anybody. It was easier to just give them their money back or make a different meal. So that's what we did. I tossed the uneaten food into our churn bucket and had Julie make him another meal. No problem, right? Well, the guy came back the next day in the afternoon, right before I started my shift. He had been unbelievably sick the night before and up until then. Food poisoning, he thought, and he had nothing else to eat other than the meal that we had provided him. My manager was really cool. He felt sorry for him but said that we really couldn't pinpoint us as the culprit to his illness, but we would be happy to refund his money and give him some coupons for free stuff. As mad as the guy was when he came in, when he got that result he seemed to be very happy with things and left. So far so good. Not really. 2 nights later, another drive-thru customer came back to the store complaining that the food tasted funny. It was like a repeat of the other night. The same rigmarole went down. We got him a new meal, and I kid you not, that guy came back the next day complaining of stomach problems, and that he had had nothing to eat other than what he had bought from us. At first I was thinking maybe we just got a bad batch of food from the distributor, whether it was burgers or fries or whatever. I went through all the orders and what had been delivered, and each time that the things happened were 2 separate orders that had been delivered by the distribution house. I couldn't put my finger on it, and neither could my manager. So I also ordered Julie to make sure that she had cleaned the broiler very thoroughly, and I was going to check it as well, change the oil in the fryers on a nightly basis rather than an every other day basis, which is what we normally did. Things were fine until 2 days later. You guessed it, another customer complaining that the food tasted funny, and then returning the next day complaining of food poisoning. At this point, my manager started to get a little weary of what was going on in the kitchen. He pulled me aside before he left for the day and said, "I don't care what you do tonight. I want you to keep a very close eye on Julie." Easier said than done. I knew I was going to be staying later than everyone else to make up for the things that I wasn't doing, which I didn't really care about. I was still getting paid. But having to have a hawk eye on someone in the kitchen is not the easiest thing. When you're the only 2 people back there, the other person kind of knows where you are at all times. I set up shop doing dishes and told Julie that I would take care of the fryer oil while she continued to make food for those who came through the drive-thru. I figured if there was any kind of shenanigans going on, I would be able to spot it, as she was on the other side of a counter that I could kind of watch her as I did my thing. Nothing happened that night, and I reported back to my manager, but he said he wanted me to do the same thing the next night, and to expect to keep doing it for the next couple of nights just in case she was on to me watching her. Yeah, he spilled the beans. His theory was that if she got me used to doing what I was doing, we might catch her in something. We were at that point. He was convinced, before he even told me what I needed to do, that Julie was doing something to the food. He couldn't prove it, but he needed my help. He also said that if he was wrong, then he was wrong, but he had a strong suspicion that Julie was up to something. About a week later, I was continuing to do what my manager asked me to do, and nobody had been sick. It was getting close to our full close time, meaning the drive-thru was also going to be shut down, and a last-minute order came in. I was helping clean out the broiler, but it was still running, and the order came back. Julie started to put it together, and while I was on a step stool, kind of doing my thing, I was also looking over her shoulder, and I noticed her do something very strange and very disgusting. She kind of looked out of the corners of her eyes, left and right, not knowing that I was watching her from above. And as she was making a sandwich for the customer, she opened a drawer and pulled out a bottle of foot powder. Without a hitch, she dumped a portion of the foot powder onto the hamburger, put a piece of cheese on top of it, and the rest of the condiments. Then she wrapped it, warmed it up in the microwave, added some fries to a bag, and then slid everything down the front chute to the drive-thru cashier, and then went back to cleaning up her station. I immediately ran back to the office, called my manager, and told him what I had just seen. He said, "Don't do anything. I'm coming in. Just keep it business as usual." About 15 minutes before we were totally done for the night, in came my manager. Without saying a word to me or Julie or anybody else, he went right over to her workstation, opened the drawer, and pulled out the foot powder. He held it up in front of her and asked why that was in her drawer. She said it wasn't hers and had no idea how it got there. A little more digging into the drawer found a pill bottle with some unknown substance. And again, he asked her where it came from, and she said she had no idea. That was a total lie, as every single night those drawers are completely emptied and sanitized for the morning crew. At this point, Julie started backing up towards the door to leave the kitchen and go out into the dining room, but my manager grabbed her by the arm and she started screaming. She tried to bite his hand and his arm, and he yelled at me to call the police. I could see that he was going crazy trying to hold this woman back, so I yelled to the cashier to call the police so I could help him out. Julie fought like a wildcat, scratching, biting, screaming, and just going bonkers. She went from being a crazy person putting crap into people's meals to a full-on psychopath. It was all we could do to hold her against the wall before the police could get there. They got there in about 10 minutes, and we were still thrashing around with her, but they took over, got her into cuffs, and took her outside. We both made statements about what had happened, most of the story being on me because I saw what she had been doing. We showed them the evidence of the foot powder and the other substance, and they took her away. My manager thanked me for helping him figure things out, and then started to make the phone calls to arrange for meetings with his bosses to come out the next day, as this was not going to be a normal firing. Oh yeah, Julie got fired. Julie also got charged with a bunch of things, and I do remember that the franchise owner threw the book at her because of his reputation, and the reputation of the company needed to be upheld. Afterwards, it was all rumor about what had happened to Julie, but I think they determined that she had some pretty serious issues at home, and for whatever reason was taking it out on random customers. Some kind of release for her was what they said. I know she did jail time, but after that I ended up quitting that job and got accepted to a school 3 states over, and I headed out that fall. This is the point where most stories end with, I hope so-and-so got the help they needed, and I hope they're doing okay now. But F her. She could have gotten people really, really messed up with what she was doing. I mean, that is so disgusting. I don't care what happened to her, be it good or bad. And by the way, we never did hear what the other substance in the pill bottle was. God knows, foot powder was bad enough. Burger Hell, submitted by Tennessee Ernie Fjord. Okay, I started working at a famous burger place when I was 17 and worked there into my sophomore year of college. I actually was allowed to work at one in my hometown during the summer and the one in my college town while I was at school. Totally dishonorable, but I would make a shit ton of food towards the end of my shift and sneak it into my bag before I left. My housemates would throw me beer money for it, and it was cool. I know, it's stealing, but we all did it, and I don't think my managers really cared. Some of them were just a couple years older than me and did it because it wasn't a bad-paying job, just a lot of hours in dealing with the younger employees who were a handful not showing up or always showing up late. In school, we had our share of the drunk students and townies, but it wasn't that bad. But the one at home? That was another story. There was this regular who would come in, named Tony, and order the same thing almost every night. I knew this because my friends who worked on nights would tell me about him. He was in his 30s, always looked unwashed, and was quiet but kind of creepy. He would just get his food, go to the same booth, eat, smoke a few cigarettes, and then leave. I remember one day he came in and blew a gasket when he found out we changed our behind-the-counter pour station to a self-service pour station. He yelled that he paid us to serve him or something like that, and my manager Sue had to calm him down and give him some gift certificates or free food. Then shit started to get weirder. One night my friend Tina was working the drive-thru, and we heard a voice screaming over the intercom that he was ready to place his order. Tina hadn't heard the sensor go off and had no idea anyone was out there, but the guy was totally going crazy, screaming that he wanted his food. It was Tony. He had walked up to the drive-thru, placed his order, and then walked to the window. Tina got his stuff and told him that he really couldn't do that again, and shouldn't because he might get hurt if a car or truck didn't see him. He took his bag of food, whipped money at her, and screamed that he wasn't coming inside and pouring his own drink if he was paying us bitches to do it. Tina slammed the window shut and told our manager, who then ran outside to tell the guy he couldn't come back for a week, and when he did, he had to apologize to Tina. He left, and we didn't see him for a week. Then, he comes in one night with an old lady, and we found out later was his mother. He orders his food and makes her get his drink from the soda fountain, and then sits in his usual spot. She seemed haggard and run down, and my manager went out to ask if she would like something. Tony yelled out, "She doesn't need anything!" And the woman quietly said she would like a coffee. My manager got a coffee, and Tony just sat there staring at the cup as the old lady drank it and had a cigarette. Tony then ripped the cup from her hand, threw it on the floor, and screamed, "This is why you can't come here!" He grabbed her arm and dragged her out the door. My manager called the police, and they came out looking for him, but he was gone. He tried to come back a few times, but all the managers were aware of him and told him to leave every time, said he was no longer welcome at our place. One of my last days, I had gotten a better job by this time and had put in my notice. I was working on the morning shift and had to take the grease from the fryers and dump it into this 50-gallon drum next to our dumpster. I guess some company came out a couple of times a week and took it away. The drum and dumpster were enclosed in this wooden structure that had swinging double doors. I take the stinking shit out there and set the container down and open the doors, and standing inside the enclosure is Tony. I'll never forget it. His face looked like a mask, deep dark circles around his eyes and this vacant stare coming out of his eyes. I looked down and his hands were covered with blood, and there was a large chef knife in his hand. "I want my fucking food!" he screamed. I slammed the doors shut and slipped the iron thing that went into the parking lot and kept it closed, and I backed away from the enclosure. Suddenly, I heard Tony banging on the door and yelling to let him out. Yeah, fuck that. I ran back to the store and jumped into the office. There were never managers on this early in the morning, so I just called the police and told them what was happening. They said not to let anyone in the restaurant, to just shut things down. We didn't really open our doors for another hour. We just did drive-through service this early, so it wasn't a problem. I told my 2 other co-workers what was going on and not to go outside, and Katie ran to make sure the doors were locked. They were, and then we heard the cop car sirens coming. Suddenly, there's a banging on the drive-through window, and it's Tony, now covered in blood and smearing it on the glass with his hands. "Let me in! Let me in!" he's screaming. Katie screamed and backed away, and we heard voices saying, "Get on the ground! Get down on the ground!" Tony disappeared from the drive-through window, and we heard another scream. And the cops had tased him, and we ran to the front windows and saw Tony writhing on the ground. They took him into custody, and a bunch of officers came out to the front vestibule, and we let them in. There were a lot of questions for us, and people were trying to get in and go through the drive-through. And the police were awesome and told people that things were shut down for a little bit, and that they were sorry, but they couldn't get their breakfast. Some people were dickheads about it, but fuck them. They didn't know what was going on. Our manager showed up and was pissed we weren't open at first, until the police told her that the safety of her employees was more important than some coffee and breakfast sandwiches. One officer, who I ended up living very close to later on, told her if she wasn't interested in leading people properly, she should get in another line of work. That was pretty awesome. So what happened was, Tony pried the dumpster enclosure doors open enough to get out, and stepped into the grease trap container I had left there. Slipped and fell onto his own knife, and then came at us through the drive-thru. Turns out he was a schizophrenic and was off and on with his meds. He had attacked his mother and did some serious damage to her as he stabbed her a bunch of times. After he did that, he ran from the house and spent the rest of the night in our dumpster area. Somehow, I don't know how, but his mother got to a hospital and was okay, and he eventually got the help he needed. But, man, that was a fucked up time at that burger joint. My time at a taxi company. I just finished my first year of university, and I had taken up a position as a taxi dispatcher with my boyfriend's cousin's taxi company. For the first week and a half, I worked mainly day shifts until the owner decided to extend the hours to 24/7, and I was the lucky employee covering 3 to 4 of these shifts a week. The next week after they started the whole 24/7 thing, I was working my first night shift alone. Taxi drivers doing the night shift were all out looking for fares, which meant a lot of the night would just be me sitting there doing dispatch stuff. I was a bit uneasy working such a shift by myself, but since I had worked at a 24-hour coffee shop, I was kind of used to working the midnight shift. It was also a Wednesday or a Thursday night, so I figured that it wouldn't be very busy. Looking back, I guess the best part about this job was that my boss let me use the internet to play video games on my laptop in the office, which is where I was always stationed. From the computer desk in the office, I could see the front door, a portion of the front desk, and most of the front windows, so I could keep a close eye on what was happening outside. There was a light above the door that always alerted me to a new customer, so I wouldn't be caught off guard if I got too into my game. On this particular night, I was working with a taxi driver named Dave, who was about 6'3" and 300 pounds. He suffered from several physical issues, one of which meant movements were long and painful for him, and he definitely wasn't Mr. Fitness or the type of person who would be able to defend himself or others very easily. But at least he looked like he could. Sometime during the early hours of the morning, at about 1:30 or 2 a.m., Dave got a call to go pick up someone in a town 15 minutes away. He gathered up his stuff and drove into the night, while I headed into the office and continued playing a video game. About 15 minutes later, I caught something over the top of my laptop, and my mind froze. I could hear panting, and in the reflection of the window, I could see someone sitting in one of the waiting chairs. I walked to the doorway that connects the front room of the office, and I glanced into the sitting area, shitting bricks. Some guy with a massive rat tail had managed to ninja his way into the office, and was now sitting in one of the chairs with his face buried in his hands, panting heavily. He was dirty, sweating, and sounded like he had just run a marathon. Now, the rat tail should have tipped me off, but I found it more hilarious than frightening at the time. A few moments passed, and I finally got up the courage to ask him if he needed a cab. He didn't respond at first, so I asked him again. He looked up at me. I took a step back into the office. His face was scratched and covered in blood from the wound on the top of his head. I was shocked and immediately offered assistance to him, but he only replied, "I'm fine. I don't need no help. I just want to go home." I asked him if he needed a cab, and if so, where he was going. He told me he lived 20 minutes away and wanted someone to take him home. After this, shit started to get weird. I called to Dave using the radio to tell him that there was a fare in the office and the guy wanted a ride. And he told me he'd be another 10 minutes. My hand was on the phone the entire time in case this guy made any sudden moves. Instead of going back into the office, I decided it was best to stay out front where there are two great big bay windows that would make it easy to see what's happening inside the taxi office. I didn't feel as though he was a threat at all to me, but he seemed really angry about something, so I wanted to make sure that if something did happen, people outside would be able to see it. I walked out into the front room, and as I got closer to this gentleman, that's when I saw it. He wasn't just bleeding from the head, but also from the shoulder and his knee. I asked him again if he was okay, and if I could call him an ambulance. Bad idea. "You don't need to be doing that. It ain't like I killed nobody, right? I never killed nobody. Don't go doing that. You don't need to call anyone. I just want to go home." I responded with, "I'm sorry, I just noticed that you're bleeding pretty badly and thought maybe you would like someone to make sure you're okay." I thought it was a fair thing to say, but he said back, "I didn't kill nobody. That asshole should have kept his mouth shut. He had what was coming to him, but it ain't like I killed nobody. You don't need to call nobody. I just want to go home." "Okay," I said to him, "but you're bleeding." And guess what he said? "Yep. It ain't like I killed nobody. I swear I didn't kill nobody. Please, don't call the cops. I don't need the cops. I just need to go home. I didn't kill anyone." Silence for a moment. He noticed the phone clutched in my hand. "I fell down," he blurted out. "Excuse me?" I said, and he said it again. "I fell. That's why I'm bleeding. I fell. I didn't kill nobody." He got up and started pacing. He was growing impatient for his cab, and I was scared shitless. Blood was now all over the chair and floor, and I had the phone in my hand, and every once in a while he broke the silence with another string of incoherent babbling about how he had done nothing wrong because he had never killed anyone, and how I didn't need to call the cops because he was a good guy. Eventually, Dave radios over that he's about 2 minutes away, and I breathe a sigh of relief. He pulled up out front. The man got into his car, and they drove off. But now, I was worried for Dave, so I called the cops and reported what had happened, and they followed the taxi cab to this guy's house where they arrested him. Turns out, this guy had run away from a nearby bar after he had physically assaulted a fellow patron. To what extent, I never found out, but apparently he had injured him with a sharp object, like a pocket knife or a needle or something. Then he took off running, fell down, and then managed to find his way to our taxi office. During his time in the cab office, the police had been searching for him, so technically no, he didn't kill anyone, but he had assaulted someone. I also found out that one of the other drivers, Steven, knew the guy from high school years ago. His name was Duke, and not surprisingly, he had a history of violence. He also had a history of coming home drunk, and he liked to beat his wife from time to time. Whether he had planned to do that this night, I couldn't say, but I'm just glad that that guy ended up in the drunk tank for the night. His wife was unharmed, and the guy who got stabbed did not die. To this day, I still see Duke every now and then, walking the streets, with his glorious rat tail. The Guy in the Drive-Thru, submitted by Alyssa S. Hey, Uncle Josh. I'm a new listener with your podcast, so sorry if this entry is more of a traumatizing what-the-fuck kind of story than anything, but, I was only 16 in this story, and I'm not sure any teenager should see something like this. I was working at a shitty little fast food joint in my town. The demographics of my hometown are the same as any other, except we're in the more rural parts of the country. So you've got the super rich folk that maybe they're on the school board, or own a restaurant in town, shit like that. That was wealthy to us. But other than that, it was lower middle class, so people on government assistance, barely making ends meet, and, well, you got it by now. If you know anything about sleepy lower middle class towns, you know they're a breeding ground for drugs, junkies, crackheads. We had them all. It was a weeknight, and it couldn't have been anything like a Wednesday or a Friday. It was pretty slow. I was working the front register in this place, and I hate the front register. Anyone who's ever done anything in food service or retail knows front register is the most hated part of the store. But luckily it was getting time for me to go home that night. It was about 8 p.m. and we closed at 10. My manager told me to bring my drawer to the back so I could be counted and clocked out. There was another girl who was working drive-thru, and another girl who was expediting orders, and then there was our fry boy who was making orders. Like I said, it was pretty slow, so they were all sitting around shooting the shit. We were all pretty close friends, and we all went to the same school, knew the same people and such. Well, I was in the back, and I was counting my money and talking with my manager, and I heard the beep on the drive-thru, meaning there was a customer in front of our speaker. I heard the drive-thru girl, I'll call her Laura, begin our greeting to take their order. Nothing weird so far, but over the clacking of my coins against the counter, I heard Laura repeat herself once, and then a third time, like the person or whoever was there wasn't answering her. She finally started punching in an order after a second, so I figured maybe they were just having to make up their mind. I heard Laura tell them to pull around for their total, and by then I was already done with my drawer, and I was about to clock out. I don't know, maybe a minute or so later, I heard Laura shriek, and the drive-thru door slammed with the loud crack sound they usually do. I heard our cook guy, and his last name was Smith, so we call him Smitty, and he was asking what the hell was going on. We heard all the rushing around, and by this point, my manager and I were standing up trying to get to the front from the back office, and we were met at the office door by our expediter girl, and her name was Nara. She was obviously freaking out, and she said, "Yo, this dude is fucking tripping." Laura came from around the corner, and she says, with tears of anxiety rolling down her face, "This guy in the drive-thru, I think he's having a seizure." We bolted to the window, and we saw Smitty hanging halfway out of the window trying to talk to the man. And that's when we saw this guy. He was convulsing, foaming at the mouth, and beating his head against the steering wheel and the headrest of his seat back and forth. Our manager went into panic mode, and she screamed to call an ambulance. We were all moving a mile a minute on what to do. Nara grabbed the phone to call EMS, and Smitty still hung out the window halfway in the guy's car, and my manager tried to ask him what the hell he was doing. Smitty turned around and he snapped, His foot is on the fucking gas, bro. We all went cold, and Smitty tried getting the keys from the ignition by dangling out the window and reaching as far as he could. But it was too late. This guy was rolling out of our drive-thru. Just so you get an idea, our drive-thru was kind of a bit of an incline. Once you're pulling away from the window, you're swinging right down this hill into the exit and then into the street. We all started shouting a laundry list of expletives as we rushed across our lobby to get out to the doors and then out to the other side of the building before this guy just rolled into oncoming traffic. We saw Smitty already there, opening the passenger door to the guy's car as it was in full motion. He must have just jumped right out the drive-thru window, feet first or something. He was a skinnier kid, and that would make sense. We saw him dive inside to jerk the e-brake and stop the car. All of us stood in front of the car just in case it started moving, which is a dumb move, but hey, we were all kids minus the manager. Nara was still on the phone with the 911 operator, and she told us that they wanted us to take his keys. So my manager opened the driver's side door to maybe see if this guy is responsive at all. Nara handed her the phone as Smitty grabbed the keys out of the ignition, and she told the operator that she was going to hold the guy steady to her chest to protect his head. Her husband was prone to epileptic episodes, so we guessed she knew what she was doing. So Smitty finally got out of the guy's car, and then something clinked on the ground, like it had kind of fallen out of the passenger's seat. We all looked to the ground, and it was a needle and syringe. We all got a new wave of fear knowing that this guy was probably overdosing. "What the fuck?" Smitty yelled and started checking himself to make sure he didn't get stabbed or poked by some dirty needle. The guy was still convulsing, but not as violently. His eyes were in the back of his head still, and now it was more like a twitching motion he was making. So we pulled him out of the driver's seat so our manager could protect his head a little better. It was literally 3 high schoolers pulling a grown man who was basically dead and weighing in his seat out onto a sidewalk. It wasn't fun, and I wouldn't recommend it. We heard the ambulance coming, and we were all wondering if we should mention the needle. My manager let go of the guy when the paramedics pulled up and his head dropped. And when I say dropped, I meant this guy went entirely limp. No more twitching or anything. No movement. And all 5 of us looked at each other like, is this guy dead? My hand was over my mouth wondering if we literally just watched a guy die right here in our lot. When the paramedics got closer, we didn't mention the needle. I mean, shit, they do this all the time, and I'm sure they'll piece that together on their own, I thought. They asked us to move his car away from the flow of traffic, and we put it in neutral and just pushed it to the end of the lot in one of the spaces that are never used. The paramedics checked him out, and apparently he was still alive but barely breathing. Either way, thank God. We all sat on the sidewalk outside the window. Our manager was on the phone with our GM, and he was in shock. We've never had something like that happen. Like, ever. We closed early that night. And people were pissed even though we were literally explaining that there was nothing we could do, but you know how customers are. Most of them are assholes. They took that guy away in the ambulance, but we still sat on the sidewalk for a few minutes. Our manager smoked a cigarette and told us we did a good job handling it the way we did. But I didn't feel it that way. I felt exactly how I said before. Traumatized. The GM gave all of us the next couple of days off after that. I mean, I needed it, honestly. I literally thought that dude died right there. And wherever he is today, I hope he has his life together, drug-free. This was a couple of years ago, something like in the spring of 2017, maybe. I've moved jobs since, and so has that manager and Laura. But about a year ago, we all woke up to the news that Smitty had died due to an incident involving gun violence. The police ruled it as an accident, but I have my doubts with how it all went down. I'm saying this just because I'm dedicating this entry to Smitty. He had a heart of gold. I mean, the guy literally hurled himself into a stranger's car to save him from rolling into traffic. That guy was genuine. Everyone, please hold your friends close and say what you need to say, because you will not fucking know when your missed chance was your last one. I love you, Smitty. My Hometown Horror by Anonymous. When I was younger, I worked at my grandfather's store in the country. It was a little place in a small town in the middle of Pennsylvania. And this was in the 60s, and the place is long since gone. Anyway, it was your typical grocery store in a little town with a little porch out front where people would sit and talk while the store was open. Most of the people in town were really nice folks, but there was this one family that always seemed to be causing trouble. The males were in and out of jail all the time, the kids were troublemakers, and the mothers, well, let's just say they got around. I'll call them the Finleys, and myself John. There were 3 brothers that lived in the same ratty-ass house with their wives and small boys and girls that were all around 8 or 10 years old. I remember I had to stop a few of them from trying to steal from the store, and they ran home crying. One of the mothers, let's call her Cindy, came back to the store screaming about me hitting her kids and other crap that didn't happen. I calmly told her what had really happened, and suddenly she started being real nice. Like a light switch. She went from crazy angry to sweetheart. She starts talking to me, and I'm just doing the be nice to the customer thing. "So, what time do you get off work?" she asked. I work here until we close at 11. Want to get together afterwards? We can talk." Now, like I said, even though I was only 19, I knew this woman had a reputation around town, and I wasn't going to be counted in the number of guys she was with. Add to the fact that her husband was a maniac and so were his brothers. No thanks. I do recall he was in jail at the time this happened. "I have to get home and help my dad with some work on the house," I said, knowing she wasn't going to buy that. "You sure about that? You're kind of cute, and I could use some conversation tonight." "No, I'm going to have to pass, but thank you much for the offer," I said. She frowns and gets a little pissy before leaving, slams open the door, and out she goes. A couple of days later, she's back to buy some things in the store and asks if I can help her to get something off a top shelf. I leave the register and head back to where she was, and she points to a kid's fishing pole set. If you're my age, you'll remember those Zebco setups they made for us kids. I smile and reach up for it and feel her hand slide up my shirt, and she said in a very suggestive voice, "My, you're a strapping young man, aren't you? I'll bet all the girls at your school want to be your girlfriend." I backed away from her, and she smiled. "I have a girlfriend, and I've already graduated," I blurted out. The girlfriend part was a lie, but what was I supposed to say? "Really? I'll bet you know how to please her too, don't you, Johnny?" 2 things. 1, I'm not sure how she knew my name, but then again it is a small town, so I guess it wasn't really a secret. 2, no one has ever called me Johnny. It was kind of creepy. I have to say, this woman wasn't a model or anything, but she wasn't a hag either. Still, I had no intentions of messing around with her, which is what she was going for. Can I get you anything else?" "Uh-huh," she says, walking closer to me. "I think you can get together with me tonight, Johnny boy, and give me something else." I'll always remember that line. I'm a guy, but the way she said it was so slutty that I knew it wasn't a good thing. I turn and head back to the register, and she slaps my butt. I just shake my head and get behind the counter. She puts her stuff on the counter along with the fishing pole. I keep my head down and cash her out. She picks my chin up and says, "I'm fishing for you, Johnny, and you know, I'm going to snag you." I back up and tell her to have a nice day. Thinking back, how corny was that woman? Goofy now, but when it happened, it wasn't at all. It was about another week, and I was leaving the store to go home, and she's sitting on the porch with one of her little monsters in tow, and I just say goodnight. She gets up and basically throws herself at me and plants a big kiss on my lips and tries to stick her tongue in. No way. I push her away and say, "Get off me, lady. What the heck is wrong with you?" She smiles and tries again and grabs my crotch and says, "Come on, Johnny, let's roll in the hay." Right in front of her kids she says this. Again, I push off and back up on the porch ledge, jump down and hightail it out of there. She's still standing there, at 11 at night, yelling for me to come back. "You can't run from me forever, Johnny boy." I did run all the way home. Again, another week goes by, and I'm happy that I don't see her in the store or anywhere else. But someone else did show up. Her husband. And he wasn't happy. I'll call him Jerry. He was a big guy, about 6'4" and over 200 pounds. I was a skinny little runt at 5'9" and maybe 150. He came blasting into the store one day and started screaming,
"Who the fuck is Johnny?"
I don't like to cuss, but I'm just repeating what happened. I look up from where I'm kneeling, putting some things on shelves, and say, "I'm John, can I help you?" He comes over and kicks me so hard I fall on my back.
Think you can hump my wife when I'm locked up, you little piece of shit?
I'm lying on my back, stunned and scared, and I blurt out, "What?" He moves for me again, and I try to scramble backwards, and then my grandfather stepped in holding a broom. "Hey," he yells, "don't you lay a finger on this boy. Now you get on out of this store." Jerry looks at him and looks at me and points a finger at me.
You're dead meat, you little asshole. Don't think you're getting away with anything.
Then he tells my grandfather to fuck off and leaves the store. My grandfather leans down and helps me up, asking if I'm okay and what that was all about. I told him everything, and he said he's going to get my dad to come and get me and that I need to stay away from them. And then he called the police and told them what happened. I guess they went to his house, but he wasn't there, and everyone acted dumb like he wasn't around at all. So my dad gets me, and I didn't work for a few days, and one night the phone rings. As I said, this was in the 60s, so we only had 2 phones, one in the kitchen and one in my parents' room. I answer it, and there's no one at first, and then I hear Cindy. "Hi, Johnny. I missed you at the store. Still waiting for our conversation time." And then she laughs and hangs up. I tell my parents, and they don't know what to do because she's not really doing anything bad. I just went to bed and tried to brush it off, and the next day my friend Derek came over. We were going to shoot squirrels in the forest on the edge of town. We got our .22s and a sack for the squirrels and headed off. We were out for quite a while, and it was getting to be around dinner time, so we started back to my house, and that's when we heard the voice. And it was Jerry.
Hey, asshole. Time for your whooping.
I turn to see him and lift up my rifle, and he just laughs as I hear another voice off to the side of us. "Now what are you thinking of doing with that, asshole?" It was one of Jerry's brothers. I turn to Derek and say, "Run!" And we do. But we don't get far because another one of his brothers is right where we were running towards. Derek stops and fires a bullet into the air, and they all kind of stop. But one of them has a shotgun and shoots right near our heads, and it blasts up a tree. I try talking to Jerry, telling him that I don't know what he's talking about and that I didn't do anything.
"So, my son's a liar, you little shit?"
he says, walking towards me. I tell him I swear I didn't do anything. He's right up on us now, and his brothers are right behind us. He pulls out a knife and flicks at me, catching me on the arm with a decent slice, but not anything that needed stitches. Lots of blood, though.
You go anywhere near my wife and I'll cut your balls off. Got it, you fucking punk?
I nodded, trying not to cry, and thinking the only way these guys are going to leave us alone is if I go along. He shoves me real hard, and I fall down, and they all walk away. Derek asks if I'm okay, and tells me that we need to call the cops when we get home. And we did get home and tell my parents, and they were angry, and my dad does call the police. Same thing happens again. They're not around, and the wives play dumb. That night the phone rang, and it was Cindy. Again. "Don't worry about Jerry, Johnny. I still want to talk to you." My dad grabbed the phone out of my hand and said, "Who is this?" She just laughed and hung up. The phone rang again, and my dad picked it up, really pissed off. This time it wasn't Cindy. It was Jerry.
"If your fucking kid gets anywhere near my wife, I'll kill your entire family."
Now, my dad was an engineer and smaller than me, but he had a hot temper and said back, "Look, buddy, I'm calling the police, and you touch anyone in this family, you're going to be eating your fucking teeth."
"Is that right, asshole?"
Jerry says.
"We'll see about that."
Dad slams the phone down, calls the cops, and the same thing happens for a third time. Later that night, we're getting ready for bed, and a rock comes through our front room window, and someone starts ringing the doorbell. We know who it is, so Dad tells Mom to call the police and goes to get his .223.
"Come on out, you fucking babies,"
screams Jerry.
"I don't hear you talking tough now."
A window breaks in the kitchen in the back. Mom screams, and in comes one of Jerry's brothers. He runs through the house with a knife in his hands and tries to get the phone from my mom, but she's already screamed to the police to get to our house. Jerry is trying to kick down the door, and his brother runs to open it, and I don't know how or why I did this, or where I got the courage to, but I tripped him, and he went flying into the door and landed on his knife, and blood started flowing all over the floor. He yells out, and Jerry goes berserk and breaks through the door. He sees his brother and says,
"What did you do to my brother, you little fucker?"
He takes a step and slips a bit in the blood as his brother is laying there moaning.
"Come here, you bastard. It's time."
Right then, Dad comes down the stairs with the rifle pointed at Jerry and tells him to stop.
"Oh, you gonna shoot me, little man?"
he says, and Dad cycles the rifle. Jerry stops and then backs up and runs out of the house, leaving his brother. A few minutes later, the police show up and find the brother half unconscious and call for an ambulance. While they are talking to us and we're all shaking and really worked up, the phone rings. An officer answered it, and we can hear Jerry yelling all kinds of foul stuff that I won't repeat here. Stuff he was going to do to me, to my mom, and make my dad watch, and we messed with the wrong guy, and so on. Later, the police said we should stay somewhere else that night, so we went to my grandfather's. He lived right behind the store. I tried to sleep, but couldn't, and heard the phone ring and my dad talking to someone. I made out, "They found him. He's in jail." And I breathed a sigh of relief. I was not a smoker, but for some reason I grabbed one of my dad's cigarettes and went outside and lit it up. I walked around to the front of the store thinking I would sit on the porch and ran smack into Cindy, who was standing there. "We can have that conversation now, Johnny." Behind her was Jerry's other brother. I turned and ran back to my grandfather's house and shut the door and ran up the stairs. My dad asked what happened. I told him and he ran outside, but no one was there. That's the last I saw of them, except the little kids who were still troublemakers. Not long after that, I decided to join the Army, and pretty soon I was off in Vietnam and didn't think too much about it. I did know that the 3 brothers went to jail, and the one who fell on his knife barely made it, but he went to prison too. When I do look back at it, I saw some scary stuff in the war, but I don't think I was ever as scared as that night. I still get the willies when I think about that family. When my son asked if he could get a part-time job at the local convenience store in our town, I told him no, and found him a job at a car dealer. I hope he never has to go through something like that. Burger Hell, submitted by Tennessee Ernie Fjord. Okay, I started working at a famous burger place when I was 17 and worked there into my sophomore year of college. I actually was allowed to work at one in my hometown during the summer and the one in my college town while I was at school. Totally dishonorable, but I would make a shit ton of food towards the end of my shift and sneak it into my bag before I left. My housemates would throw me beer money for it, and it was cool. I know, it's stealing, but we all did it, and I don't think my managers really cared. Some of them were just a couple years older than me and did it because it wasn't a bad-paying job, just a lot of hours in dealing with the younger employees who were a handful not showing up or always showing up late. In school, we had our share of the drunk students and townies, but it wasn't that bad. But the one at home? That was another story. There was this regular who would come in, named Tony, and order the same thing almost every night. I knew this because my friends who worked on nights would tell me about him. He was in his 30s, always looked unwashed, and was quiet but kind of creepy. He would just get his food, go to the same booth, eat, smoke a few cigarettes, and then leave. I remember one day he came in and blew a gasket when he found out we changed our behind-the-counter pour station to a self-service pour station. He yelled that he paid us to serve him or something like that, and my manager Sue had to calm him down and give him some gift certificates or free food. Then shit started to get weirder. One night my friend Tina was working the drive-thru, and we heard a voice screaming over the intercom that he was ready to place his order. Tina hadn't heard the sensor go off and had no idea anyone was out there, but the guy was totally going crazy, screaming that he wanted his food. It was Tony. He had walked up to the drive-thru, placed his order, and then walked to the window. Tina got his stuff and told him that he really couldn't do that again, and shouldn't because he might get hurt if a car or truck didn't see him. He took his bag of food, whipped money at her, and screamed that he wasn't coming inside and pouring his own drink if he was paying us bitches to do it. Tina slammed the window shut and told our manager, who then ran outside to tell the guy he couldn't come back for a week, and when he did, he had to apologize to Tina. He left, and we didn't see him for a week. Then, he comes in one night with an old lady, and we found out later was his mother. He orders his food and makes her get his drink from the soda fountain, and then sits in his usual spot. She seemed haggard and run down, and my manager went out to ask if she would like something. Tony yelled out, "She doesn't need anything!" And the woman quietly said she would like a coffee. My manager got a coffee, and Tony just sat there staring at the cup as the old lady drank it and had a cigarette. Tony then ripped the cup from her hand, threw it on the floor, and screamed, "This is why you can't come here!" He grabbed her arm and dragged her out the door. My manager called the police, and they came out looking for him, but he was gone. He tried to come back a few times, but all the managers were aware of him and told him to leave every time, said he was no longer welcome at our place. One of my last days, I had gotten a better job by this time and had put in my notice. I was working on the morning shift and had to take the grease from the fryers and dump it into this 50-gallon drum next to our dumpster. I guess some company came out a couple of times a week and took it away. The drum and dumpster were enclosed in this wooden structure that had swinging double doors. I take the stinking shit out there and set the container down and open the doors, and standing inside the enclosure is Tony. I'll never forget it. His face looked like a mask, deep dark circles around his eyes and this vacant stare coming out of his eyes. I looked down and his hands were covered with blood, and there was a large chef knife in his hand. "I want my fucking food!" he screamed. I slammed the doors shut and slipped the iron thing that went into the parking lot and kept it closed, and I backed away from the enclosure. Suddenly, I heard Tony banging on the door and yelling to let him out. Yeah, fuck that. I ran back to the store and jumped into the office. There were never managers on this early in the morning, so I just called the police and told them what was happening. They said not to let anyone in the restaurant, to just shut things down. We didn't really open our doors for another hour. We just did drive-through service this early, so it wasn't a problem. I told my 2 other co-workers what was going on and not to go outside, and Katie ran to make sure the doors were locked. They were, and then we heard the cop car sirens coming. Suddenly, there's a banging on the drive-through window, and it's Tony, now covered in blood and smearing it on the glass with his hands. "Let me in! Let me in!" he's screaming. Katie screamed and backed away, and we heard voices saying, "Get on the ground! Get down on the ground!" Tony disappeared from the drive-through window, and we heard another scream. And the cops had tased him, and we ran to the front windows and saw Tony writhing on the ground. They took him into custody, and a bunch of officers came out to the front vestibule, and we let them in. And there were a lot of questions for us, and people were trying to get in and go through the drive-through. And the police were awesome and told people that things were shut down for a little bit, and that they were sorry, but they couldn't get their breakfast. Some people were dickheads about it, but fuck them. They didn't know what was going on. Our manager showed up and was pissed we weren't open at first, until the police told her that the safety of her employees was more important than some coffee and breakfast sandwiches. One officer, who I ended up living very close to later on, told her if she wasn't interested in leading people properly, she should get in another line of work. That was pretty awesome. So, what happened was, Tony pried the dumpster enclosure doors open enough to get out, and stepped into the grease trap container I had left there. Slipped and fell onto his own knife, and then came at us through the drive-thru. Turns out he was a schizophrenic and was off and on with his meds. He had attacked his mother and did some serious damage to her as he stabbed her a bunch of times. After he did that, he ran from the house and spent the rest of the night in our dumpster area. Somehow, I don't know how, but his mother got to a hospital and was okay, and he eventually got the help he needed. But, man, that was a fucked up time at that burger joint. Car Haunted My Convenience Store by Jumbo Jimbo. When I was 18, my friend Dave and I got jobs at a convenience store at the edge of our town of Altus, Oklahoma. It was a full-service stop right in town, food, gas, and groceries. There was a car lot and a pawn shop across the street, and that's important for this story. We both started working on the 7 to 3 shift in the mornings, but after a while, 2 people on the graveyard shift just up and quit, and our manager asked us if we would like to take that over until he found replacements. We thought, why not? Less customers, more time to screw around. Outside of the weekends, it was a very quiet shift with maybe 10 to 20 customers all night long, mostly drunks looking for beer we couldn't sell them, but that's about it. Dave was looking to buy a car and thought he would look at one of the ones across the street. We got to know a lot of the guys who worked there as well as the owner because they came over for food and fuel all the time. He didn't end up buying anything there, but one of the guys who worked in the garage told him about a car on his street that was for sale. It was a 1999 Buick LeSabre with low miles, and it was owned by an older couple that had passed away. Not a sex machine, but it was a nice car. This was 2010, and a lot of our friends had cooler cars, but Dave loved it. I mean, it was wheels. After a couple of weeks, Dave shows up late to work one night, and I asked him where he was. The frickin' car wouldn't start. I pointed out in the lot and said, well, you got it running, obviously. He nodded and said he was going to have his buddy across the way look at it later. He did, and the guy couldn't find anything wrong. Everything was tip-top. It was a head-scratcher. The next night, the same thing happened. Car wouldn't start, but would fire right up after midnight. He explained it to our manager, who laughed and said he should just be riding his bike to work like me and he wouldn't have to worry about being late. This happened on and off for the next month or so. Dave finally bought a new battery. That seemed to solve the issue. But then things got weirder. Around 2:15 one morning, the front of the store was flooded with light. Dave's Buick's high beams had turned on while he was inside working alongside me. Dave thought it was someone fooling around, but when he went out to check, there was no one in the parking lot, and the doors were all locked. The next night, the lights came on again at the same time, but this time started flashing on and off. We're not supposed to leave the store unattended, but I went out the back and around the side of the building while Dave went out through the front doors to see if we could catch someone. No one was out there. Once again, he takes it to the garage friend, and he still can't find anything. This kept happening, and it was starting to freak us out that it happened at the same time every night. But there was nothing he could do about it except remove the fuse before coming into work. And that's when the phone started to ring at 2:15 every day. No one was ever there, just the sound of like a soft breeze or something. Every night, the same thing. Then stuff started happening in the store, too. We would stock the shelves with something only to turn around a minute later and find all the stuff back in boxes. This would happen so quickly, and there was never a sound. We told our manager, and he laughed and said we were seeing things, and this stuff never happened on the nights we weren't there. It went on like this for a while, and then the climax happened. The front door started opening on its own at 2:15, and after a few seconds, the door to the back room would open. This was a door that had a big handle that required effort to open and push in. Naturally, we checked things out, but there was no one ever there. One morning we were talking about it as we were getting ready to call it a night, or morning for that matter, when the guy who owned the pawn shop overheard us talking about the car and all the other weird crap that was going on. He asked if David had the car looked at, and then asked where he got it. Dave told him, and let's call this other guy Tony, said, "Older couple over on Blank Street?" Dave said yeah, and this was crazy that he knew. Tony said he was friends with the grandson of the people who owned the Buick and drove the car for a little while until weird things started happening, and just like what was happening to Dave. Turns out the old woman had died in her sleep just before midnight one night, and her husband passed away a few weeks later at, you got it, 2:15 in the morning. Not too long after that, we both quit working at that store. Dave got a better job and my family moved to California. I still talk to the manager, but he told me that since we left, no one has reported anything strange happening, and he still makes fun of me about it. If the old folks were trying to get our attention, it worked. Bookend of the story? Dave kept that car for another 6 years until it finally died, pardon the pun, on a December morning at 2:15 a.m. when he was driving home from a night spot. It's pretty creepy. A Restaurant Stalker, submitted by Meganomics. My name is Julie, and this story took place a few years ago in 2013. I was working at a restaurant in my town in Oklahoma. It was a Hooters, and I got an unwanted stalker just by doing my job. If you don't know, Hooters is a place that the staff is mostly females who wear specific outfits that are all the same. I guess that it's not really a fast food place, but I'm sending this to you anyway, Uncle Josh. So, our outfits are really short shorts at the time. Low-cut tops and shiny pantyhose. I haven't worked there in a couple of years, but I guess they have a different uniform now. Anyway, I was in college and worked there because the tips were usually good, and most of the people who came in to eat and drink were really cool. One night, a group of guys came in and got one of my tables. They were all there for some fantasy football thing, and at first were more into their event and just gave me orders for what they wanted as far as food and beers. As the night went on, one guy started acting a little odd. I could see he was checking me out, and that was okay. I mean, honestly, my clothing begged you to look at me. His name was Barry, and he was a little older than me and was in law school at the same place I was going to school. I checked on the table to see if they needed anything. I took another round of drinks, and then I felt Barry's hand brush against the back of my leg, right at the curve of my butt. I brushed it off as him just raising his hand to the table, and I went to get their drinks. I figured maybe I was too close to him, leaning over to get the drink orders. As the night wore on, I could feel him looking at me wherever I went, and it was getting creepy. When I went back to the table, I heard his friend saying, do it, just ask her, man." But it wasn't until the end of the night when they were leaving that he did ask me out. I told him I was flattered, but I had a boyfriend and was quote-unquote not on the market. He said that was a shame, and I said, "No, not really," and his friends all laughed. I lied. I had recently broken up with my boyfriend, but it was easier to say that I had one than to tell someone I wasn't interested in them. Maybe not the best way to do things, but oh well. The point isn't whether or not I was attached, but what happened after was crazy. They finished their football party, and I grabbed the money that they had left on the table, and as I counted it and checked the tab, they left me a decent tip. Then I saw a bill poking out of a folded piece of paper. It was a $100 bill with a note that said, "I think you should reconsider." There was a phone number on the note, and the name Barry. I showed it to my coworker Fran. She said I was just a lucky bitch, and I wondered if I should keep it. I did keep it, but I later wish I hadn't. The next night I worked was 2 days later, and my friend Fran said the guy named Barry had been in the night before asking for me. I shrugged and didn't think much about it, but that night he came back in and took a seat at the bar. I had to walk past him a few times, and the third time he touched my arm and asked what I thought of his note. I simply said it was nice and thank you, but I'm just not interested. I should say at this point that Barry was not a textbook creeper. He was actually pretty good looking and in good shape, but there was just something off about him. He started to say something else, but I told him I had another table to get to and to have a good night. Things got busy and I didn't pay attention or notice him anymore, and he wasn't there at the end of the shift. Mike, my manager, walked me out to my car. He was a great guy and walked all of the girls to their cars, even if we were in a group, and he pointed to something on the windshield of my Eclipse. It was an unsigned note that said, "You'll be wrapping those legs around my head before you know it." It had to be Barry, and then I told Mike about him. He said he'd stay on it, and if Barry came back, he would let him know to lay off. I didn't see Barry the next few nights I was at work, but I started to get texts from an unknown number saying really sexual stuff about my body and what the person wanted to do to me. Some of it was in-depth, saying things like, "I want to tie you down and make your pussy foam," or "My cock wants to tickle your tonsils." I remember those distinctly. I never saved those texts early, but man, I never will forget those. Barry did come in with his friends again. I told Mike, and he made sure to give the table to another girl so I didn't have to deal with him. Barry went to the bathroom after a time, and Mike stopped him and was polite and told him he was welcome at the restaurant, but told him he needed to stay away from me. I guess Barry said no problem, and that was that. About a week later, I got back to my house that I shared with 3 other girls, and my roommate Leslie said there was something for me. It was one of those edible arrangements with chocolate-covered strawberries. There wasn't a card, and I thought maybe it was my ex-boyfriend. I was on good terms with him and texted him, and he said no, it wasn't from him. Again, the only thing I could think of was this guy named Barry. That night was the beginning of the insanity. I certainly wasn't going to eat any of the fruit and didn't want any of the girls I lived with to eat it either, so I threw it in our kitchen garbage can. The next morning, I woke up and screamed. The basket was on my desk, and some of the strawberries had condoms on them, and a typed note that read, "Don't you like fucking strawberries? Ha ha ha." My roommate Crystal was the only other person home, and she came running to my room and asked what was wrong. I pointed to the basket, and her eyes got huge. "What the fuck?" she asked. I got up and threw it into the garbage and posted to our house Facebook page that whoever did that wasn't funny, but everyone said they didn't do it. I immediately again thought of Barry, but how the hell could he have gotten into the house? I asked everyone if they had locked the doors, and Crystal said that she was the last one up, but she couldn't be sure that she did lock the door. Later that morning, I got a text from the unknown number that read, "I'm going to show you that pain can be pleasure." This was the first one that I screen capped because it actually frightened me. I went to work that night and showed it to Mike. He said I should call the cops, and I did, with nothing other than the text and the basket, but it had been handled by me and most of my roommates, so there wasn't much they could do. I tried blocking the unknown number, but I have no idea if that really did anything. I didn't see Barry at all and got no more messages on my phone or any other weird shit happening at my place. I was going home for Thanksgiving, so I was glad to get away for a little bit and just be with my family. My parents lived about 2 hours away, and I was going right after work that night. I had packed all my stuff earlier and had it in my car ready to go. I didn't want to waste any time going back to my house for it. Work was uneventful and kind of quiet, as most people were at other bars or probably doing what I was doing, getting ready to go home. I was gearing up for my dad. He didn't like that I worked at Hooters. Daddy's little girl stuff, I guess. Mike told me I could leave, and he walked me to my car and said Happy Thanksgiving, and I got on the road and turned up some music. All was well for the first hour, and there weren't a lot of cars out once I got off the highway. My parents lived out in the country, so it was just dark back roads with no streetlights until I drove through little villages on the way. I stopped at a gas station to get something to drink in one little town and to use the bathroom. I was in there for maybe 5 minutes, but when I got back to my car, there was a rose that had been painted black, and it was under my windshield wiper with another typed note that said, "Driving alone is dangerous for little girls. I am watching you." If I hadn't just gone to the bathroom, I might have peed myself right there. I jumped in my car, hit the wipers to get the stuff off, and flew out of the parking lot. I sped all the way to my parents' house, pulled in the driveway, and then ran into the house. I was nearing tears, and even though I was still wearing my Hooters outfit, my dad didn't say anything about it and asked what was wrong. After I told my parents a brief version of what had been going on, he went outside to get my things out of my car and looked up and down the road for some reason, and then came back inside. I showered and changed and sat with my parents in the living room, and that's when my dad started in on the "this is only happening because of that place you work" shit. And then my phone pinged. "Does Daddy have daughter issues? What will he say when my dick is in your ass?" read the text. My face went white and I showed my mom. She said she was calling the police and did. But the text didn't stop. "I have a gun and you'll be doing whatever I tell you to do soon." 5 minutes later, "I've made a special cage just for you. You'll be seeing it soon." This was a small town, and an officer came over and I showed him my phone. But again, just like before, there wasn't a lot he could do. He told me to keep saving the messages going forward and try to lay low. A lot of help he was, but I know it wasn't his fault. I went to my old room and called my friend Amy and just cried and cried, telling her I was so scared. My dad was really mad and went around checking the windows and doors. I finally started to settle down and fell asleep after turning my phone off. The next day I got up and was going to help my mom with the Thanksgiving Day food and wanted to also go for a run, but my dad said I should stay inside and just take it easy. I did need the charger for my phone and I had left it in my car, so I went out to get it. Under the windshield was another note. This one was handwritten and it said, "Don't you turn your fucking phone off on me again." I yelled for my dad and he came out running and saw it. He called the cops this time, and another guy came out and took the note. I was scared, but I was also angry. My older brothers came home for the day and heard about what was happening, and they went into beast mode. They wanted to protect their little sister. I charged my phone, and about an hour later it rang. My dad said not to pick it up, and it went to voicemail, but whoever called didn't leave a message. Everything was quiet after that, and I tried to enjoy my long weekend as best I could. And I actually did relax enough to have a good time, but I got nervous when I knew I had to go home. My one brother had to drive the same way I did, so he tailed me to my house that Saturday afternoon and got me inside safely. My roommates weren't supposed to be back till later that night, and some of them were actually coming on Sunday, so I was going to be alone for a little bit, and I was trying not to freak out. I decided to watch a DVD and got engrossed in the Hunger Games, and for a while forgot that I was scared. Then I heard glass breaking in the kitchen. I jumped up and looked around the corner into the kitchen and saw a hand coming through the door window, opening the locks. I screamed and ran upstairs to my room and slammed the door shut and tried to push my desk against it. And then I hid in my closet, and that's when I could hear someone walking around downstairs. I was going to call the cops, but then realized I had left my phone downstairs in the living room. I was shaking and almost crying when I heard the footsteps come up the hallway and go into my roommate's room. My room was the next one down the hall. The intruder fumbled with the knob and pushed the door open, but the desk did stop it from opening. I was looking out a crack in the closet door, but couldn't see anything, and then I heard a voice say, "You could have made this easier." Then I heard loud thumping, and another voice say, "Get the fuck on the floor, motherfucker!" And a scuffling, and lots of grunts and stuff, and then a loud thud. Then another voice cried out, "You're not going anywhere, asshole!" There was a knock at my door. "Are you in there? Are you okay?" I opened the door and saw the face of a guy who lived next door. I got up and went over to him, crying my eyes out, and I was hysterical. He and his roommate had seen Barry breaking into the back door and came running from their house. My saviors had knocked Barry to the floor, and one guy was basically sitting on him, keeping him down. I didn't know these guys that well, but I do know that they played rugby. They were big guys. "Call the police," said one guy. His name was Jeff, and turns out he's now my boyfriend. I did, and they came out. Barry was screaming, "Let me go!" but they kept him at bay. He was wearing all black and had a ski mask on his head and face. I knew it was him when the police came and they took it off and handcuffed him. In the hallway was a gym bag with duct tape, a bottle of some kind of pills, and 2 sets of handcuffs. There was also a knife on the floor the guys had kicked away from him. This sicko had followed me to my family's house and tailed me home, and he knew I was by myself. He was going to kidnap me, and what's even sicker, when the police investigated it deeper, at his place there was a dog cage in the basement with other restraints in it. That message he sent was totally true. Barry had all these bondage porno mags and DVDs all over his house, and I shudder to think what he had planned for me. He was arrested, of course, and charged with a lot of things that will keep him in jail for quite a while. As far as I know, he's still working on his 18-year sentence. Like I said, I started dating Jeff and stopped working at Hooters, and I got a job as a secretary in a law office. I think it's funny that Barry was a law school student, and I'm the one who ended up working in a law office. That was a really scary ordeal for me. I know it's not about fast food like I said at the beginning, but it did start with food. The creepiest thing that I still can't get out of my head was Barry saying, "You could have made this easier." The Dumpster, submitted by Brendan. 6 years ago, when I was a junior in high school, I was a complete dick. I was screwing up in school, I never listened to my parents, I snuck out all the time and partied, and generally was just being a pain in the ass. I'd been to jail already for some minor issues, possession of marijuana, a disorderly conduct charge, and also got in trouble at my school with the truant officers. Yeah, I was on a really great road. Looking back, now that I'm 23, it's so clear how good I had it and how much of an asshole I was to my family, and to some of my friends, too. We lived outside of Portland, Oregon, and I still live there and just finished my college degree in biosciences. I had an older and younger sister that were angels, and I was the black sheep for sure. But the summer after my junior year, I did somehow manage to pass despite me skipping school all the time and being the jerk that I was. My father gave me an ultimatum. He told me that I had to get a job, and that was that. For the last 2 weeks of school, I pretended like I was interviewing at the local Arby's, Burger King, McDonald's, and the pizza places. I wasn't doing any of that. I just kept telling my dad that they weren't hiring or didn't need me at the time. Well, my dad looked into where I'd said I'd interviewed, and when he found out that they had no idea who he was, he flipped out. I heard him talking to my mother one night as I was sitting in my room playing video games, and she was saying, "No, Bill, no," and my dad saying, "Liz, I'm fucking done, he's going." Doesn't take a genius to know who the he was in that conversation. A little while later, I heard the footsteps coming up the stairs and no knock on the door, my dad just bursting in and telling me to turn off my game. I looked at his face and I knew that this was not the time to be a jerk. He wasn't angry. He was dead serious, and I knew when he looked like that, something was about to go down. If he was yelling, I knew that I could push issues, but if he looked like this, I knew something was up. "You are disappointing your mother and me," he said. "You're a smart guy, but you're ruining your life at this point, and I'm not going to give you the lecture about your permanent record and all that bullshit, kid. But I've made a decision about what you're going to do this summer, and this is it." He paused, and before I could ask what he was talking about, he said, "This Tuesday, you're flying out to your uncle's in Montana. You're going to work your ass off at his gas station and food stand, and I've told him that if he doesn't feel like paying you, he doesn't have to. You're going, and that's it." Of course, I objected at that point and started a fight, and he looked at me again, and I stopped because I knew he was not fooling around. My dad was a big dude, an ex-Marine, and I cannot believe the amount of shit that he put up with that I threw his way. He was tough, but he was gentle. He was rough, but he was fair. I mean, he could have squashed me like a bug, but he never ever raised his hand to me. Again, in retrospect, he gave me so many chances, and I pissed them all away. But now it was summer, and I wanted to just fool around. And here I was, going to this unbelievably remote gas station food stand place to work for free. Sidebar, my uncle did pay me, but that's neither here nor there. So after some more arguing with my mother when she came in, she said, "It's the best for you, Brendan. We really need you to do this for yourself." I thought, yeah, right, for myself? You're throwing a kid on a plane out in the middle of bumfuck Montana because you don't want me around and you don't have to deal with me. That was it. My dad helped me pack, got me the plane ticket, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "If I find out you don't complete this flight, I will find you and destroy you." That actually made me laugh, and he laughed too. Then he took me aside from the rest of my family and said, "Son, I know deep down you're a good guy. I know you are. I would tell you to join the military, but you've got to learn some lessons before that. I know you're angry with me about sending you out there, and I know you won't see your friends over the summer, but I really, really need you to do this." And at that moment, I realized what he was trying to do, and for the first time in my smart-ass life, I resigned myself to listening to my dad and doing what he wanted me to do without the backtalk and the other nonsense. So a few days later, there I was on a plane, heading out to Helena, Montana. My uncle was also an ex-Marine and another no-nonsense guy. He picked me up in his truck, and we made the 4-hour trip out to his place in the middle of nowhere. He had a really nice home behind his business, but there was nothing else for literally 15 miles in any direction. And when I say direction, I mean the one road that went by his place. Like I said, it was a gas station with a food stand, And I'll call it fast food because it was really just mostly fried crap, burgers, hot dogs, and stuff like that. On the ride out, he read me the rules about what was going to happen according to the agreement he made with my dad. I was to live in his house, do chores around the house when needed, but I would be running the food portion of the gas station. When I say this was in the middle of nowhere, that doesn't mean we didn't have customers. There were lots of truckers and other people traveling that would stop to get gas, get some food, go to the bathroom, get some snacks, that kind of thing. He had another business that he was mostly engrossed with, and he had 2 other people that ran the gas station. A girl named Emily, whom I had an unbelievably awesome fling with while I was out there, and a guy named Dave, who kind of worked between the gas station and the food stand. The food stand was really just a window off the gas station with stoves, fryers, and freezers. I would just wait until someone came up to the window, ordered whatever they wanted, and I would make it while they hung out in their cars or wandered around the parking lot. To be honest, it really wasn't that bad, and I started to feel like I was actually doing something that was helping others while not wrecking my own life. I'm not going to get into the fling that I just mentioned, but I will say that I'm still friends with Emily. She's just an awesome person. I told her all about why I was out there and how much of an asshole I was back in Portland. She understood and laughed and said the fresh air and hard work would change my mind about who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. She was 2 years older and had a little bit more under her belt than me. Okay, holy shit, that's a lot of backstory, and none of it's scary. But this is where it gets a little messed up. Behind the gas station and food stand, there was a dumpster. Surrounding the dumpster was an 8-foot chain link fence with a gate at the front to keep out bears. And I will say it was supposed to keep out bears, but oftentimes they would just scale the fence and get into the dumpster anyway, and I'm talking big, big bears. They weren't grizzly bears. You had to go out in the woods or the mountains to see those, which my uncle did take me out one time on a weekend to check out. There were black bears, which, not as large, but are still majorly huge animals. They would wander around in the yard sometimes, and my uncle would scare them off with an air horn. One night after my shift, Dave was working in the gas station. We closed the food stand around 9, and it usually took me an hour or 2 to clean everything up, and take the garbage out to the dumpster. This was in the beginning of August, and the sun had gone down, and only the light from the back of the building shone out towards the dumpster. I opened the gate and closed it behind me, and I threw a bag of garbage in. And then I went back to get another bag and repeated the process. But for some reason, this time, on the second trip, I had a really strange feeling. After throwing the bag in, I turned around and realized what the strange feeling was. Standing at the gate was a huge black bear. He was staring right at me, and at first I froze. Then I remembered some things that my uncle had told me about making myself look bigger and making some noise to see if it would run away. I put my hands over my head and yelled, "Get out of here, bear!" And it backed up for a second and then ran around the side of the fence behind the dumpster. I waited for a little bit before just popping the gate open and running back to the building. I figured I'd better err on the side of caution because I knew that 50 yards would be longer than I thought, and that thing could catch me if it was still out there, if it wanted to. I reached in my pocket for my cell phone to call Dave, but I realized that my cell phone was back in the food stand. And oh shit. I could hear the bear at the back of the dumpster, where that was actually a wood and not a chain link fence. It was snuffling and kind of growling, and I could hear his body rubbing against the wood fence. I went to the front and gingerly tried to open the gate, but then suddenly heard heavy footsteps. The bear came tearing around the side of the chain link fence and stood there in front of me again. I'm not kidding, I almost shit my pants. I didn't know if I could run through the gate or climb over it, so I just kind of backed up and tried to do the "get away, bear" thing again. It didn't work, but this time it kind of stuck its face into the gate and had a really low growl, and I knew that this guy was not leaving anytime soon. It started to put its front paws up on the gate, and I picked up a rock and threw it at it, but it made a loud pinging noise. This seemed to shock the bear a little bit, and he went back on all fours. He wandered around the back again, and I kept telling myself, "You can run, you can run, you can run." But a clear head came through and said, "No, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't." By this time, I'd been out of the building for at least 15 minutes, with this bear circling me. I don't necessarily think he was out to get me. I'm sure he just wanted to get in the dumpster. But there I was, between him and his dinner. I know he didn't want me there, and I'm sure given the choice he would have gotten me out of the way. I was desperately thinking, how the hell is anybody going to know that I'm out here, wishing Dave would just realize that I was no longer in the building. I was almost on the edge of tears, thinking, what am I going to do? The bear came around the front again and sat down on his haunches, looking at me. And for whatever reason, I tried talking to it, saying, I'll let you in here if you just let me by. Yeah, brilliant. Talking to a bear. But hey, I had to give it a shot. It was about another 15 minutes of the bear circling and sitting and staring, and then circling again, and then sitting and staring, when thank God Dave realized that I was out there. He must have looked out, saw the bear, and then went back inside and grabbed an air horn. He started blasting it off while moving towards both of us. This time, the bear got up and took off into the field next to us, and Dave screamed for me to run into the building. It didn't take me long to think twice. I opened the gate, shut it behind me, and I hauled ass back to the building. We went inside, shut the door to the place, and Dave looked at me and said, Dude, are you okay? I went to the bathroom, threw up, and then looked at myself in the mirror. I was pale and sweating and terrified. We called my uncle, who came out with a rifle, and told him the whole story. And to my chagrin, he burst out laughing and said, Serves you right, you little prick. At the time, I was angry when he said that, but when I think about it now, I laugh my ass off. He was right. I needed something to scare me into being a responsible person and not a jerk to everyone who cared for me. For the rest of the summer, I never saw any bears out there, but I was always sure to take the garbage out well before it got dark, and with Emily or Dave watching from the back door of the building. Long story short, I learned my lesson and went back home, and now try to go out there as much as I can, as my uncle is teaching me how to hunt. And I'm happy to say the only bears that I see out there are through the scope of a rifle. The funny thing is that I have gone on bear hunts, but I refuse to shoot them. Deer or elk, you name it, that's my bag. But I will never shoot a bear. I have respect for them, and have respect for the one that got me back on the right track into being who I am today. Hope you read this, Uncle Jay, and as you say, everyone be excellent to each other. Hey, that's my line, you prick.